In this second short lecture, we will continue on the theme of brain evolution, but focus on how operations of nerve cells in the brain gave rise to cognition. Specifically, it has remained an enigma how life, with its capacity to self-organize matter into complex creatures, was able to generate something that seems immaterial, consciousness. What do we mean when talking about consciousness? This phenomenon is not so easy to define head-on, because most related terms, such as awareness or perception, lead to circularity. We can describe conscious processes in terms we can relate to, such as waking and sleep, losing consciousness by anesthesia. And we can tell others and remember whether we really saw that red traffic light while driving a car. When we walk or cycle, we remain unconscious of countless body movements carried out routinely, while we are conscious of something we were thinking about. Our conscious experiences are accompanied by all kinds of motor activity, emotions, memory, planning. Yet, what makes consciousness a unique problem in neuroscience is that it is marked by qualitative experience. This is what also philosophers, like David Chalmers, see as the hard problem. Our experiences are made up of very distinct sensations, like the colors we see, melodies we hear, or the taste of beer, or the Van Gogh painting over here. But the neural basis of these experiences is not like that at all. The neurons, or nerve cells in our brains, generate electrical impulses, and these are physical chemical events playing out at the level of neuronal membranes, and are of a different nature than what we experience. This question has puzzled philosophers and scientists for many centuries now, but it's interesting to see what contemporary neuroscience and artificial intelligence can contribute. First of all, what can be peeled away from our experiences before consciousness is lost? For instance, how important is motor behavior? If we look at this one-celled organism, Paramecium, we see no lack of movement, as the cell is swimming forward autonomously with its cilia, its sweeping hairs, and it bumps into an object, it recoils and changes its heading direction. But to call this organism conscious would go a little too far. The organism displays reflexive behavior. It responds to stimuli with behavior, but that's automatic. It appears to lack a rich sensory apparatus and brain to generate the kind of experiences we are familiar with. In my recent book, The Brain's Representational Power, I argue that motor activity often accompanies consciousness but is not essential for it. Patients that were unfortunate enough to become paralyzed, even up to the point where they could only move one of their eyelids, are still fully conscious. And if you dig into neurology, there are numerous conditions that dissociate consciousness from motor activity, including linguistic expression. When examining patients with brain damage that causes loss of their functions, like loss of memory or emotions, we also find that these patients do remain conscious. Their consciousness is somewhat impoverished by the loss of these emotions, or the lack of recall of past events, but it's still there. This patient, the late Henry Molaison, had both of his hippocampi removed from his temporal lobes, and he lost the ability to store or recall his personal experiences. Here on the right we see a brain scan with the loss of hippocampal tissue on one side of the brain. Molaison lived more or less in a present, as on an island, isolated from his past and future. But his perception was intact, and he was well able to communicate about his experiences through language, facial expression, and gestures. The peeling away test leads to the conclusion that it is perception and imagination that forms the essential core of consciousness, an ability to represent the world and our body in a meaningful, graspable way. But what is this representation that the brain generates? If we shoot a photo or a video, we also generate a representation of the world, which is stored on a hard disk in the form of digits, long strings of zeros and ones. But we don't consider the video camera to be conscious. Here we get to a key point. Does consciousness have a biological function, or is it merely an epiphenomenon? In my book, I argue that consciousness does have a clear biological function. It provides us with an instantaneous overview of what is going on in our senses. Not a long list of meaningless zeros and ones, but an integrated multimodal world model. A representation of zeros and ones from all our senses together would take very long to process. So the brain needs a faster representation, a qualitative experience in which our senses become integrated at the same time. The meerkat in this picture will have some kind of experience, but not the video cam. Or consider this frog that tries to catch the digital ants walking across the smartphone screen. We see a frog displaying sensible stimulus response behavior. It detects ant-like objects in its field of view, attacks and tries to eat them, but it fails to apprehend the big picture, to interpret the whole scene with the smartphone in it, or the boy that tries to be smart. This is not to say that frogs would be totally unconscious. I would rather argue that frogs have limited means to represent their world at once. The representational power of their brain is just less than in humans, and this entails the view that consciousness will be graded across species. Nonetheless, consciousness is not ubiquitous throughout nature. It requires highly specific kinds of brain connectivity and brain interaction patterns. Full-blown conscious experience likely depends on a multi-level hierarchical organization of information processing, ranging from spikes in single neurons to assemblies to bigger networks of multiple brain areas. But could such an architecture be mimicked by computers? Robots have become so advanced that it is tempting to think that smart robots could build even smarter robots, outperforming humans. According to Ray Kurzweil, for instance, this point of taking over, or the singularity, could arrive within decades. There's no question that robot technology is moving ahead very fast, and knowledge games such as Jeopardy have been won by computers already. However, fast information processing is not the same as being conscious. Simply having the facts in a digital format is still very far away from integrating sensory inputs and experiential knowledge into a multimodal representation that gives us a quick overview of our situation. So I argue that we first need to understand more about how neurons and ensembles of neurons put together sensory information into an ordered experience that has meaning to us. In the first place, more brain research is required to understand how consciousness might be generated. Today's computer and robots are not conscious, but in principle, new generations could become conscious if they have the right architecture and internal processes. Finally, we need to ask whether we want this to happen. Conscious robots would suffer possibly pain and could thus be entitled to have rights like humans have.